Welcome to the Lott Carey Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving podcast. I'm Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Madison McCreary, pastor of the First Baptist Church of New Market in Piscataway, New Jersey, and learning coordinator for Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving. The Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving weekly podcast grows from a multi-year journey among pastors committed to flourishing in ministry. This is a project of the Lott Carey Foreign Mission Society and is made possible through the generous support from the Lilly Endowment. Learn more about Lott Carey and how it helps churches to extend the Christian witness throughout the world at lottcarey.org. That's LOTTCAREY.org. Join us for weekly conversations with pastoral thought leaders who share wisdom from the Black church for the whole church. Let's join Reverend Dr. David Emmanuel Goatley, Associate Dean for Vocational Formation and Christian Witness at Duke Divinity School, and the Project Director for Lott Carey's Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving. This week, he's in conversation with Reverend Dr. Micah L. McCreary, President of New Brunswick Theological Seminary in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
We're excited to have a conversation today with Dr. Micah McCreary. He's the president of the New Brunswick Theological Seminary in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Prior to that, Dr. McCreary has been a pastor, a professor, a university administrator, a clinical psychologist, and now a seminary president. Welcome, Dr. McCreary. We look forward to our conversation today.
It is great to be here with you. It's great to be here with you.
You're aware that more than 50 pastors have been on pilgrimage together toward flourishing in ministry. Our assumptions are that every round does not go higher and higher, that flourishing in ministry requires both striving and thriving, and that flourishing in ministry can be understood like a tree. Sometimes there are leaves, sometimes there are blossoms, sometimes the leaves may be falling away, sometimes there are only branches, yet the tree can still be healthy and thriving. From your perspective as someone who's in ministry as vocation in a variety of ways for a number of years, can you describe for us what flourishing in ministry looks like to you?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Flourishing in ministry to me looks like something that impacts the community, something that really makes change, helps develop relationships, helps build success. That's what I look at as flourishing. When you can really look back and say, okay, for Jacqueline and I, when we pastored Spring Creek, that we started with 30 members and we ended with, 2 businesses, 2 properties that were paid for in full, a 19-acre property, 11-acre property, buildings there, membership at, 700 plus. And to look at those kind of things is an outward sign of success, but to look at the way people in the community felt about us, felt about the church, felt about each other, to me is how we really measure flourishing. We actually had a wonderful project with a Presbyterian church down the street called Bridge Builders, where we were already working on conversation between a white congregation and our African-American congregation. To me, that's flourishing, that's thriving.
We've been working with Pilgrim pastors on something that we call a formula for flourishing. We call it a formula, not the formula. but a formula for flourishing. And this formula holds that if a pastor's leadership capacity plus the service context yields ministry content, there is a higher probability for flourishing. Another way of saying it is that if one's content is drawn out of capacity in context, that there's a higher probability for flourishing. No guarantee, but a probability. So we do not assume that it makes sense to drag and drop ministry models that a pastor sees happening somewhere else, because after all, you do not expect a palm tree to flourish in Maine. So can you talk to us about how your context of ministry service has informed your content of ministry?
I sure can. And thinking about that formula, it fits my life because I can't drag or drop me anywhere because I grew up fourth generation pastor, and watching my dad, my granddads, and seeing close up and personal the struggles that they had. It wasn't something I wanted to do. And I wound up, going to school for engineering and becoming an engineer. And then family struggles with my brother going to jail for murder pushed me to being a little bit more concerned about people again. And so I switched to doing that. And so you got this piece of me that, is a pastor, wants to be social, wants to deal with these issues, but struggling with that. And really over time learning that I fit better as a professor, not because I liked it better than pastoring, but because my capacity really was around knowing people, understanding people, which of course came from studying psychology. And then the professorate kind of gave me the content of what it means to help people change, to grow, to do the work as a clinician. And that then morphed back into how I pastor, because for me, like I said, it was relational. And so the content of all of that affects the context of me doing it. I can't operate as a pastor without considering what's going on within the individual, what's going on within the system, what's going on within the culture. That's a part of my learning now. And same way with being the presidency is probably more comfortable than anything else because I can bring all those pieces to a seminary presidency. Where at the university as a president, they were always questioning, where's the spirituality piece? What does that really fit? And so that context really didn't fit as well as this one does now. And so for me, it's been all those pieces being morphed and molded and gelled together. It kind of makes me who I am now.
Sometimes when people talk about context, we think about physical location, but it sounds like you have a broader definition of context that does include location, but it's more than that, like systems and other things. Can you say a little more about how context means more than place?
Yeah, well, it's contextualization. So you can look at context as just where you are, but it's also when you contextualize the environment that you're in. So understanding that this is important to people, how they move, how they assemble. I mean, one of the reasons why we're having so much of a struggle, I think, around regathering with churches right now is because it's not the context of the building, it's the contextualization of ministry in those buildings, in those spaces that people want to get to. It's the relational piece there that's really there. And that's the piece that I'm looking at when I use the term.
That's very, very, very helpful. Thank you for, I guess we're getting glimpses of the clinical psychologists and the systems thinking and stuff.
Yes.
So can you talk to us now a little more about capacity? So talk to us about how the capacity of a pastor contributes to the content of a pastor's ministry. So everybody can't do everything,
Right.
but everybody can do something. So from your perspective and your long arc on working in a variety of ways, talk to us a little bit about how the capacity of a pastor contributes to the content of that pastor's ministry.
I think based upon the formation of that pastor, is a piece I think we leave out a lot of times, because if your formation is like mine around psychology, around family, around helping people be better, that becomes a part of your pastoring. If your formation's around business, and a lot of people who are second career ministers, that's their formation, then they're going to be much more business oriented in how they do the pastoring. So for me, that's there. For example, I'm talking to a doctoral class the other day about regathering, and I'm like, this is more than about mask, and wearing a mask, choosing not to wear a mask. And we began to push deeper till we got to how does worldview affect how these people are looking at the political issues? Because based upon your worldview, you may wind up in one particular political spectrum. And so for me, being a psychologist strengthens my ability to be a pastor as long as I pay attention to that formation. If I ignore it, I think you create a conflict that really hinders both the formation and the application of who you are. You really can't do the job of a pastor well if you're struggling with, well, this is really who I am. And so that whole context has to come together within and without in order for a person to really flourish.
If there's a pastor and that pastor is in a certain context, and the pastor recognizes that if I had a certain kind of capacity, I might be able to contribute in a way, but that's not my capacity.
Yeah.
What do you say to that pastor? Should they leave, find somewhere else? Should they work on developing and growing?
Yeah.
How do you help a pastor in that situation?
Two things come to my mind right off the bat. One is to really work on developing a support system, whatever that means. So whether there's a mentor, a mentee, a community around them that really has been authorized to give input, that has been empowered to say, hey, you're not doing this well, or you're doing this in a way which is bringing these results. Let's consider it. I think that's one piece. The other piece is to actually look at training models. I mean, there's so many places you can go to spend some time. I mean, for me, I wouldn't be as good of a president as I was if I hadn't done the American Council of Education's fellowship for people who want to be presidents. So in 2007, my institution sent me for a year-long internship with the president, and you walk with that person. I went to board meetings with that person. And so the fact that I have a successful board now here in New Brunswick, I have to attribute to the fact that it was connected to my fellowship where I learned how to work with a board. I wouldn't have known that. I mean, I was thinking about a deacon board, but this is a different board, And so that was there for me. I think in a lot of places within the church, everybody wants to be the chief steward, before they learn the pieces of doing stewardship. And we need more models. We need more opportunities to grow, and that not to be ashamed of that. I mean, there are deficits in all of us.
It sounds like the way you imagine pastoral life is that people may have capacities in different ways.
Yeah.
And they still can be an effective pastor, that there's not necessarily one way of doing it. That's what it sounds like I'm hearing you say.
100%. I mean, there are people who are strong extroverts and strong introverts who both can master preaching, but it's done through different vehicles. One through introspection, one through practicing it through the gift of influence of language. There, you can actually use I watched one of my mentors who was a people person. He wasn't the greatest preacher, but he loved people, and he taught me how to pastor in a sense of the biblical pastoral model, walking with sheep, guiding sheep, governing sheep, and that's another way to be successful. I think, each one of the aspects of church, a person can really master those and then bring in gifted others to assist him or her, with the things that are not their passion.
A word to our listeners. Lott Carey's Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving podcast is funded by the Lilly Endowment through its Thriving in Ministry initiative. We'll be right back with more from the interview.
Since 1897, the Lott Carey Global Christian Missional Community has helped churches to extend the Christian witness around the world through prayer partnership, financial support, and technical assistance. We come alongside indigenously led communities to support ministries of evangelism, compassion, empowerment, and advocacy. Together, we are touching lives with transforming love. You can invest in churches, schools, clinics, and more throughout the world. Visit us at lottcarey.org. That's LOTTCAREY.org. Thanks for your partnership in this ministry.
Welcome back to the Lott Carey podcast, Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving. I'm Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Madison McCreary, the Learning Coordinator of Lott Carey's Thriving in Ministry program. Each week in this podcast, my colleague, Reverend Dr. David Emmanuel Goatley, interviews a prominent Black pastoral leader to gain insight for flourishing in ministry. Now back to more of his interview with Reverend Dr. Micah L. McCreary, President of New Brunswick Theological Seminary in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Can you give us an example of another area of the pastoral side of your life where you had to develop? I mean, you just had to, you weren't quite where either you needed to be or you wanted to be, where you needed to develop. And how did you do that?
The action is in the interaction. And I think one of the gifts in graduate school was that it's the interaction that happened. It's a person-environment fit that goes on. And so I think knowing that when I got into places, I think my first pastorate went well for the first couple years. We went from a small church with $30,000 coming in to $90,000 coming in. We built a house for a member in the community. I mean, literally built a house, for a member in the community. All these things happening. And then one day I walk into a building committee meeting and my issues were there and I was not yet trained to handle my issues. One issue was older, bossy family members who are female in gender. Another was Black and white issues. And they collided in that I'm the new 29-year-old pastor about to try to build a building. And the mother of the church, who was a minister of Christian education, says, we don't need a new building. We need education space. I'm like, well, in the plan, we're going to turn the current sanctuary into an education space and build this new worship center. And she just wouldn't let it go. And of course, there was a white architect there. And I'm being embarrassed in front of this guy. It's my stuff. She wasn't embarrassing me. And I made the foolish mistake of posturing myself, taking off my jacket, like I'm the man, rolling up my sleeves. And I silenced that woman in that church. And my loving deacon, who I just adored, called me that evening and said, Pastor, I've never been so embarrassed of you and for you. And it broke my heart. And it was just God's timing that I had just got admitted into the PhD program in psychology and was, deciding what to do or not. But that helped my decision to take the money and move on, but I learned from that I need to learn to control my issues and my passions. And hopefully I've not made that same mistake again. I'm much more likely now to listen, to hear, to come up with another way to resolve an issue rather than to be very confronted, because I can be confronted. I can get up in your face and tell you what I think and feel. And that's just my inner city Detroit self comes out. It's who I am. I am a black belt in martial art. I love to fight. I have no problem scrapping, but you can't do that as a leader all the time, and that mistake walks with me. I've reconciled with her. I'm forgiven, everything's straight, but that's a lesson in life that I will not forget. I think that happens in everyone's life, and we don't need to bury those. That denial is unhealthy. It's really, how do I embrace this? How do I internalize this? How do I learn the lessons from this? And recognize that typically it was an interaction of a lot of things coming together. How do I master each of those things as I'm moving in my life?
That's helpful thing about how to anticipate
Yeah.
What's going on so that you can watch out for the problem spots.
Yep.
But I'd like to look at the other side of that now, or another side, and ask you, in your trajectory as the pastoral side of your life,
Mm-hmm.
what brings you the most joy as a pastor?
Two parts there. One is the personal relationship, both with Jacqueline, my partner for life over 37 years now, and partner in ministry, Makita, our daughter in music. And so one of the joys was seeing that synergy. Brothers like yourself, the synergy is there. So that's the one piece of the joy. The other piece that I can say now is both looking at ministers I've mentored, psychologists I've mentored, and persons I've worked with who are now healthy. I got a call this week from someone who was talking to a person who I had just been friends with, hadn't really been clinical, relationship with. But this person said to them, Micah saved my life, and I'm like, whoa, but, that's what I can now see in so many instances, both in clinical practice, in pastoral practice, in administrative practice. Is the joy for me is I have a history now of people being better than they were when they met me, because of their relationship with me. And that's a sheer joy that I can go home now, and be happy with that, because I know I've been faithful. And you go back to that first example I gave, that didn't happen in that example, so it's a good thing to see, God grow me. And in that growing me, I've been able to help others grow.
What's the best advice that you received about pastoral leadership?
One piece it's my motto. It's not what you do that matters, it's what you do with what's been done. And I pretty much live by that. It's like a lot of times I was in a meeting the other night and a person was so upset because they had I had said, don't go this way. They went that way and it blew up. But I was able to say to the person that, yeah, it blew up, but people were anxious before you made that mistake. Your mistake made them angry, and their anger allowed them to get to the sense of their true emotions in the moment. So to me, it was just a God thing. It was a part of it that you would do that. And so again, it's not, that's been the best piece. And one of my clinical supervisors taught me that. He says, it's not what you do, it's what you do with what's been done and how you handle that really matters. And that's probably the best piece that I live by.
You said that the person you were talking to, that the folks that the person was interacting with, they were anxious.
Yeah.
And then something happened and that anxiety became anger.
Yeah.
Can you say a little more about the relationship between that, and is it a progression or is it cyclical? Or
Yeah,
that's an interesting
yeah.
concept you just shared.
To me, anxiety is much more of a defense, and it's a reaction, it's a worry, and so because we're worried, we defend against it, and that defense becomes anxiety. It's kind of there. Anger is a God-given emotion. Wrath gets to be a problem. If you get so angry, you become wrathful, of course, then you're in a problem. But anger, in a sense, makes me not worry about my worry, and it makes me deal with what I got to deal with.
We have people who are listening to our conversation and to this series of podcasts from throughout the country and around the world. And so knowing that there are a number of listeners who are either preparing for ministry, or they're early in ministry, or they're even down the road somewhere in ministry, what is some advice that you would like to offer to listeners about what they can do to flourish in ministry?
Awesome question. I think one would be to really practice spiritual disciplines. I think too often we get so engaged in ministry, we don't do the spiritual practices that have been a part of the church from the very beginning. That's prayer, that's fasting, that's meditation, that's devotions. And I think to daily have a regimen of spiritual devotion, spiritual discipline is a powerful piece of it. Second, I think of that scripture in Isaiah 50, verse 4, that says, "The sovereign Lord has given me a well-instructed tongue to know the words that sustain the weary. Wakens me morning by morning, but wakens me to listen." I think the second piece is that, if we really want to flourish, we recognize we have the answers. I don't doubt that with any of the great leaders in this country. But how do you listen? And not just to the words, but to the souls, to the spirits, to the essence of people around you. And with that, it would be to really then live with no regrets. Don't regret what you've done, but live in the moments and do the best you can to make the best of those moments.
Particularly since you have been a pastor, and you have been and are a clinical psychologist. So I want to talk to you as a clinical psychologist who is talking with pastors. What would you advise that pastors need to look out for, that if they don't pay attention to it, it could be a hindrance to their thriving in ministry?
I think it's controlling our passions. I think as a pastor, you have to be passionate. You're passionate about the word. You're passionate about whichever aspect of ministry you're then engaged in, whether it's raising revenue, preaching the word, tending to a sheep. But your passion can become your downfall if you don't shape it, model it, perfect it, learn how to use it, and put in place the restraints to that passion. That could be a restraint where there's the people who hold you accountable if you know you have this weakness. You flipped it on me, because I've gone with people who are suicidal, people who are homicidal, who are churchicidal. They're going to kill their church spiritually, and it's the same passion that brought them success that's now about to destroy them, because they haven't looked at how do I, with this passion, have in place constraints when I go off course. And that would be the piece I'd really say, look for those restraints. Find somebody you can make a phone call to that say, talk you down off the wall, talk you down off, from the bullet, whatever you're about to do crazy. Because we all can do crazy. And that's the thing I think we forget about, is that, I'm good. No, you're good now, and if you don't take care, you may not be good next time around, because it builds up. And it's more the building up of stress. It's not one stress, but it's when you got, that perfect storm, all those 5 stressors hit together, boom, you blow it.
We've been in a wonderful conversation with
sir.
Dr. Micah McCreary, the president of the New Brunswick Theological Seminary in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Thank you, Dr. McCreary, for spending this time with us and for the gift of your wisdom and your insight in flourishing in ministry.
Thank you, Dr. Emmanuel Goatley. That's an awesome name, man. It's good to see you. It's good to be with you. And thank you for this honor. I'm honored and I'm humbled.
Thank you for joining us today for Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving, a weekly podcast from Lott Carey as we listen in on conversations with prominent pastoral thought leaders. Join us next week for a conversation with a new guest and fresh insights. Wisdom from the Black Church for the whole church. I'm Reverend Dr. Jacqueline Madison McCreary. Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving is produced in partnership with Good Faith Media. Music by Makita McCreary. Share the word with those who need to hear it. Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving, wherever you get your podcasts. Also listen online at lottcarey.org.